When God wants to make a man powerful, he does not crown him in front of kings. He does not hand him a sword forged from gold, nor surround him with praise and song. No, he isolates him, silently, patiently, as if forgotten. When the divine chooses a man for something greater, it begins with subtraction, not addition. Everything unnecessary is removed. Comfort, applause, validation. Not because these things are evil, but because they are distractions from what is essential. Power cannot be planted in soil too soft. So the ground is hardened first, the roots are tested. You see, power that is gifted without transformation becomes poison. A man must be tempered before he is trusted. Fire does not only destroy, it purifies. And so the man is cast into trials not by accident, but by design. Loneliness is not neglect, but initiation. Silence is not absence, but instruction. The man begins to feel as though the world has turned its back on him. Doors close, people leave. The path he once knew crumbles beneath his feet. But this is no mistake. This is the slow unraveling of his former self. For only when the ego dies can the soul rise. In the middle of this wilderness, he is stripped of the masks he once wore. He no longer relies on charm, wealth, or reputation. He becomes invisible, not because he has lost value, but because he is being hidden from those who cannot yet understand him. He is being remade, cell by cell, thought by thought, pain by pain. And in the solitude he begins to hear, clearly for the first time, not the noise of the world, but the pulse of life itself, the deep and wordless knowing, the stillness beneath all motion. There he meets something ancient within himself, something untouched by time or doubt. The divine reveals itself not as a booming voice from the sky, but as the still whisper within. The world may call him broken, but he is simply unfinished. He is not weak, he is waiting. And in this waiting, strength is born, not from muscle, but from presence, from knowing that even in the void he is held, even in the storm there is purpose. A powerful man is not one who forces the world to bend. He is the one who can stand still while the world spins. He knows he does not need to dominate to be strong. He knows that vulnerability is not weakness, but truth unclothed. And truth, when unshackled, is unshakable. Unshakable. And so, little by little, the pieces return, but they are not the same. What comes back is purified. What remains is only what matters. Relationships become fewer but deeper. Success becomes simpler but richer. Confidence flows not from what he has, but from who he is. When the divine forms a man for power, it first breaks him open to pour in something eternal. Not power as the world knows it, not control or fame, but clarity, purpose, stillness, authority rooted not in fear, but in understanding. He does not speak loudly, yet when he speaks, the room listens. He does not chase approval, yet others are drawn to him. He walks lightly, but leaves deep footprints. He has met fire, and now carries its warmth, not its burn. So if you find yourself in the wilderness, alone, confused, undone, perhaps you are not lost, perhaps you are being forged. Perhaps the silence around you is not emptiness, but the breath of the divine shaping you in secret, preparing you for what cannot be built on shallow ground. It is in the dark that roots grow. It is in the silence that truth settles. And it is in surrender, not striving, that real power is born. This strange journey continues. The man begins to notice that things that once excited him no longer spark fire within his chest. The chase for recognition, for approval, for status, it all begins to feel like a distant echo from a life he no longer belongs to. He watches the world continue its frantic pace, chasing shadows and applauding noise, and yet he no longer feels compelled to join the race. Something deeper now calls him, not louder, but deeper. And he begins to see that strength is not in appearance, not in the shape of the body or the loudness of voice, but in stillness, in restraint, in the ability to sit with one's thoughts and not be consumed, in the ability to feel pain and not run, in the ability to stand in fire and not beg for rain, but instead let the fire purify what does not belong. A man made powerful by the divine learns to trust in absence. He learns that the hollow places in life are not always mistakes. They are sacred spaces where transformation takes root. And in that space where no one claps, no one sees, and no one applauds, he begins to meet the parts of himself he had buried long ago, the wounded child, the silent dreamer, the one who once believed but was told he was foolish. These parts resurface, not to weaken him, but to be seen, acknowledged, and healed. He no longer fears being misunderstood. He sees now that most of the world is not listening, they are projecting. Most people do not seek to know, they seek to confirm what they already believe. And so he becomes content with being silent when the world screams, with stepping back when others clamor for the stage. He no longer needs to convince, his presence is enough. His silence now speaks louder than his old words ever did. The man who is being made powerful begins to walk a different path. One less crowded, less obvious, less celebrated. He begins to let go of what the world calls success. He starts to ask deeper questions. What truly matters when all else is stripped away? What endures when the titles fade, when the crowd moves on, when even the body grows weak? And in asking these questions, he finds a new kind of wealth, a wealth measured not in things, but in awareness, in presence, in peace. He may still live among others, but he is no longer swayed by their winds. He sees their games, their fears, their constant need to perform, and he understands. He has been there too. He does not judge, he simply no longer plays. The divine has taught him through subtraction, through losing what he once thought he could not live without. He discovered what he never knew he had. Through being unseen, he found the eyes that truly see. Through being silenced, he discovered the voice within that speaks without sound. He becomes careful with his energy. He no longer gives it to every opportunity, every conversation, every battle. He begins to discern not everything needs a response. Not every door needs to be opened. Not every fight is his to engage in. He learns that wisdom often looks like doing nothing, that restraint is a kind of strength most will never recognize. And yet he does not become hard, he does not shut down, he does not retreat into bitterness. That is not what the divine intended. Power without love becomes tyranny. Strength without compassion becomes cruelty. So he learns the balance, to be firm but kind, to be clear but gentle, to be grounded but open. He begins to move differently, with intention, with clarity. There's a grace to his presence now, not because he rehearsed it, but because he has shed the noise. He no longer seeks to impress, he seeks to embody. And in doing so, he becomes magnetic, not through effort, but through authenticity. Pain, which once felt like punishment, is now seen as a teacher. Loss, once seen as injustice, is now known as refinement. Every wound has become a window. Every scar, a symbol of what was survived, endured, and transcended. He looks at the world now and sees how much of it is asleep, how many are caught in illusions of status, of image, of constant striving. And yet, he no longer feels the urge to wake them all. He knows that awakening cannot be forced, it must be chosen. And so he simply lives, and by living in truth, he becomes a quiet reminder to others of what is possible. He understands now that true power is never taken, it is grown. It is not given by others, it is discovered within. And once found, it cannot be taken away, for it is no longer dependent on circumstance or opinion. It is rooted in something eternal, unshakable. And this man, who once was broken, who once was alone, who once questioned his worth and place in the world, he becomes whole, not because he is perfect, but because he is integrated. He does not hide his shadow, he has befriended it. He does not pretend to have all the answers, he has made peace with the mystery. There is something divine in a man who no longer seeks to be more, but simply is, who no longer fears being small, because he knows the entire sky exists within him, who no longer runs from suffering, but walks with it like an old companion, knowing it has shaped him into what he's now. He may still be misunderstood, he may still be criticized, but he does not shrink. He does not retaliate, he does not collapse. For he understands now, not every attack requires a shield. Not every insult is worth absorbing. His value is not up for debate. He is no longer for everyone, and that is precisely the point. He is not here to be liked, he is here to be real, and in being real, he gives others permission to drop their masks too. He walks into rooms and shifts atmospheres, not because he speaks loudly, but because his presence is grounded, rooted, alive. The man who has been made powerful by the divine is not addicted to certainty. He welcomes the unknown. He knows that life is not a problem to solve, but a mystery to live. He has stopped chasing control, and in doing so found peace. He has stopped resisting change, and in doing so found flow. He has stopped performing, and in doing so found his true voice. And when others ask him how he became this way, so steady, so clear, so unshakable, he does not offer a formula. He simply smiles, for he knows that every man must walk his own fire, must face his own silence, must be stripped of his illusions and left alone with himself. No book, no speech, no teacher can replace that sacred process. It is not a curse, it is a calling. It is not punishment, it is preparation. He no longer prays for ease, he prays for alignment. He no longer seeks comfort, he seeks truth. He no longer asks to be seen, he asks to be real. And somewhere along the way, without realizing it, he became powerful, not because the world said so, but because he no longer needed the world to say anything at all. He found something greater. He found himself. And what is more powerful than a man who has nothing to prove? A man who has been to the depths of his own soul and returned whole does not fear the dark. He does not fear failure, rejection, or loneliness, because he has already faced them and found that they did not destroy him, they refined him. Now he walks with a quiet authority, the kind that cannot be bought or taught, the kind that is felt. And while the world continues its clamor for more, louder, faster, he becomes the still point in the chaos, the calm eye in the storm. He knows now what few ever understand. Power is not in the noise, but in the silence, not in control, but in surrender, not in having, but in being. He wakes up each day not with the weight of needing to prove his worth, but with the quiet joy of simply being alive. The morning light no longer calls him to run a race he didn't sign up for. It simply greets him, warm and impartial, and he receives it like an old friend. The urgency to compete has dissolved. The need to measure his value against the metrics of others is gone. He understands now that peace is not the result of external order, but of inner surrender. He walks slower now, not out of laziness, but because he is present. He sees more because he is no longer rushing past life. The colors of the trees, the laughter of children, the texture of silence between words, all of it has become poetry to him. The world hasn't changed. He has. He no longer demands that life give him meaning. He meets life, and meaning arises. The man who has been shaped by divine intention knows that suffering is not the end, but the beginning. He remembers the nights he could not sleep, the ache of uncertainty gnawing in his bones, the hollow echo of silence where he once heard affirmation. He remembers the days when hope seemed like a foolish thing, fragile and fading. But he also remembers how, in the deepest pit, something in him refused to die. Something whispered, not in thunder, but in stillness, "Stay." And he stayed. Not out of strength, but out of surrender. And in that surrender he found a strange kind of power. Not the power to change the world, but the power to change himself. Not the power to manipulate, but the power to endure, to wait, to listen. That power didn't roar. It breathed. It didn't conquer. It endured. And in its endurance, it overcame. He began to love differently, not possessively, not fearfully, but freely. He no longer clung to others out of fear of being alone. He no longer performed to be chosen. He loved because it was his nature to love, not his strategy to be loved. And in that shift, he became truly free. He noticed how the world often mistakes noise for confidence and speed for progress. But he had learned otherwise. He had seen how the loudest men were often the most afraid, how the busiest lives were often the most hollow. He had come to see through the illusion. And once seen, it could not be unseen. He stopped chasing people who did not see him. He stopped apologizing for his depth. He stopped shrinking himself to fit into shallow spaces. He no longer begged for belonging. He belonged to himself. And yet he did not grow cold. He did not wall himself off. His heart became more open, not less, but open in a new way. Not to be consumed, but to connect. Not to be drained, but to give from overflow. He learned that boundaries are not walls, but bridges with gates. That discernment is not judgment, but wisdom. He became more honest, not just with others, but with himself. He faced the lies he had believed, the masks he had worn, the roles he had played, and slowly he shed them all, not in a moment, but over time, like leaves falling from a tree in autumn. And beneath it all, he found something shocking in its simplicity, his own face, the one he had hidden even from himself. There were days he stumbled, days the old fears returned, but he no longer fought them. He welcomed them, sat with them, learned from them. He no longer sought to banish his darkness, but to understand it, to befriend it. And in doing so, he became whole. He discovered that true humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. That real confidence is not loud, but rooted. That strength is not the absence of tears, but the courage to cry when needed, and still rise when the time comes. He no longer needs a stage to be seen. He no longer needs validation to act. He no longer needs noise to feel alive. He has tasted silence and found it more nourishing than applause. He sits with pain and does not flinch. He holds joy and does not cling. He lives with intention, not for show. And in this he becomes something rare, a man who is fully here. The divine, in shaping him, was not concerned with convenience. The path was not paved nor smooth. There were times he questioned everything, times he screamed into the dark. But it was in those moments, those raw, unfiltered moments, that he was being remade. And he sees now that nothing was wasted, not a single tear, not a single disappointment, not a single betrayal. Every broken thing served its purpose. Every fall taught him how to rise with grace. Every closed door redirected him to something deeper. He learnt that letting go is not losing, that endings are not failures, that silence does not mean abandonment. He learned to trust what he could not see, to follow what he could not explain, to obey the pull within that made no sense to others, but led him home every time. He has stopped asking for clarity and started asking for courage. Clarity comes and goes, courage remains. Clarity is a luxury, courage is a necessity. And in living with courage, he has discovered clarity of a different kind, the clarity that comes from walking forward even when the path is hidden. His days are no longer dictated by fear, but by alignment. He listens more, speaks less, acts with precision. He no longer seeks to be everywhere. He only seeks to be fully where he is. He no longer measures time by productivity, but by presence. He no longer tries to fix others. He understands now that healing is an invitation, not a command, that transformation cannot be forced, that truth must be lived, not imposed. And so he becomes an embodiment of what he once tried to preach, and that, more than any words, changes others. He sees the beauty in the overlooked, the sacred in the ordinary, a cup of tea, a quiet walk, a kind word. He knows now that life is not a problem to be solved, but a gift to be received. And he receives it, moment by moment, with gratitude. He becomes a man no longer carried by the current, but guided by the flow. Not resisting life, but dancing with it. Not demanding outcomes, but trusting the unfolding. He has stopped searching for arrival and started embracing the journey. He understands now that true power is not domination, but liberation. Not having control, but needing none. Not being feared, but being trusted. Not being admired, but being real. And in all of this quiet, powerful becoming, he has not become superhuman. He has become fully human. awake, aware, alive. He is not the man he once was. He has died 1,000 small deaths, each one necessary, each one sacred, and in those deaths something greater has been born, something truer, something unshakable. Now, when people meet him, they may not understand what they feel, but they feel something, a depth, a weight, a stillness, a peace that cannot be fabricated, a presence that needs no introduction. That is what it means to be powerful, not to impress the world. In far, the practice, the charity, which is when God wants to make a man powerful, he does not rush the process. He does not shield him from the storm. He walks him through it. He does not crown him in comfort. He carves him through challenge. Because true power is not about how much you can control. It's about how much you can surrender and still remain whole. The man God chooses does not rise because the world lifts him. He rises because nothing can hold him down anymore. Not fear, not failure, not the opinions of others, not even the echo of his own past. He becomes a man who has faced the silence of heaven and chose to keep walking anyway. A man who has bled without bitterness, lost without breaking, and stood alone without losing himself. That is power, quiet, steady, eternal. So if your life feels heavy, if the world feels distant, if all you have is your breath and the fire inside you, then maybe, just maybe, you're not being forgotten, you're being formed. Because when God wants to make a man powerful, he doesn't give him the world, he gives him himself.